Telvan Rowe had spent 42 years staring at maps, and in all that time, the maps had never stared back. But tonight, sitting alone in the dim blue glow of the Cartography Bureau's main display chamber, he felt watched. He felt like something vast and patient was sitting on the other side of the dark spot on his screen, waiting to see what he would do next. He rubbed his upper eyes with two of his four hands and leaned closer to the holographic display. The galactic map stretched out before him like a sea of light. 200,000 star systems, give or take a few thousand, all mapped and cataloged and color-coded according to species territory, trade routes, resource density, and political alignment. It was the single greatest achievement of the Council of Aligned Species. It was beautiful, it was complete, except it was not complete, not anymore. There was a hole in the map. Telvan had first noticed it 3 days ago during a routine update cycle. The Bureau received fresh telemetry data from thousands of long-range survey probes every standard day, and it was Telvan's job to process that data and fold it into the map. He had been doing this for so long that his hands moved on their own, clicking and sorting and filing without much thought. But 3 days ago, his hands had stopped, because the data from Sector 7741 Gamma had come back empty, not corrupted, not scrambled, not incomplete, empty, as if the probes had reached the edge of the sector, looked into it, and seen nothing at all. Telvan had run diagnostics. He had checked the probe network. He had recalibrated his receivers. Everything was working perfectly, and the probes were sending data from every other sector just fine. But when they pointed towards 7741 Gamma, they returned silence. Clean, perfect, absolute silence. And 7741 Gamma was not a small sector. It was enormous. Roughly 9,000 cubic light-years of space, sitting in the mid-spiral arm of the galaxy like a shadow on a bright wall. Telvan had pulled up the territorial records to see what was supposed to be there, and he had found a single entry written in the dry and careful language of old diplomacy. Terran territorial space, sovereignty recognized under the Voss Accords, Galactic Standard, year 4112, human space. Telvan was Sirathi. His people were insectoid, with hard shells the color of polished copper and compound eyes that could see in spectrums most other species could not. They were known for being precise, careful, and extremely difficult to fool. Telvan was all of these things, and he was also stubborn, which was why he had not stopped thinking about the hole in the map for 3 days straight. He had tried to find older data. He wanted to compare the current blank zone with previous readings to see if there had ever been data from that region. What he found made his shell itch with unease. There was no previous data, not from last year, not from 10 years ago, not from 100 years ago. The region had been blank on the map for as long as the Bureau's digital records existed. The only difference was that the blank area had been smaller in the past, much smaller. 300 years ago, when the Voss Accords were first signed, the blank zone had covered roughly 2,000 cubic light-years. Now it covered 9,000. It had grown, slowly, was steadily like a living thing breathing in the dark. And nobody had said a word about it. That was the part that frightened Telvan more than anything else. Not the blank zone itself, but the silence around it. In 42 years of cartography, he had never seen a gap in the map that did not generate at least a dozen urgent reports, funding requests, and expedition proposals. The galaxy was full of curious species, ambitious species, species that could not stand the idea of not knowing something. A blank spot of this size should have been the subject of conferences, debates, and at least one badly planned military scouting mission. But there was nothing. No reports, no proposals, no questions. The blank zone simply existed, and everyone around it had apparently decided, without discussion, to leave it alone. Surin Telvan had gone to his supervisor first, a Pelway named Dren, who managed the mid-spiral mapping division. Dren was a good supervisor, calm and fair, with the wide, flat eyes and blue-gray skin typical of his aquatic species. Telvan had shown him the data. He had pointed at the blank zone. He had explained the growth pattern. He had waited for the alarm, the concern, the immediate escalation. Dren had looked at the display for a long time. Then he had looked at Telvan with an expression that was hard to read, but seemed very close to pity. "I see it," Dren had said. Thank you for bringing it to my attention. I will note it in the system. Note it, Telvan had repeated. Dren, 9,000 cubic light years of uncharted space, growing by measurable increments every decade. And you want to note it? I want you to move on to the next sector update, Dren had said, and his voice had been gentle but firm, the way one spoke to a child who was asking about something they were too young to understand. This is not an error, Telvan. This is how it is. Telvan had not moved on. He had gone over Dren's head, straight to the bureau director. Director Ulani was Pelway as well, but where Dren was calm and gentle, Ulani was sharp and political. She had built the bureau into the most respected scientific body in council space, and she protected its reputation in the way a mother protected her eggs. Her office sat at the top of Valith Prime, the orbital station that served as the neutral heart of galactic governance. From her windows, you could see the slow turn of the planet below and the distant lights of 1,000 docked ships. Telvan had presented his findings carefully. He had brought charts, growth projections, and a detailed timeline showing the expansion of the blank zone over 3 centuries. He had been thorough. He had been professional. He had expected Ulani to be impressed, or at least concerned. She had listened to everything without interrupting. When he finished, she folded her webbed hands on her desk and looked at him with her wide, unblinking eyes. Cartographer Rowe, she said, how long have you worked for this bureau? 42 years, Director. And in those 42 years, have you ever known this bureau to publish incomplete data by accident? Telvan paused. No, Director. Then why do you assume this is an accident? The question sat between them like a stone dropped into still water. Telvan felt his antennae flatten against his skull, which was a Sirathi stress response he usually had better control over. You are telling me, he said slowly, that the Bureau is aware of a 9,000 cubic light-year gap in the galactic map and has chosen to do nothing about it. I am telling you, Ulani replied, that there is no error. The map reflects what the map is meant to reflect, and I am asking you respectfully to return to your duties and leave this matter alone. But the growth pattern alone? Leave it alone, Telvan. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. There was something underneath it, something he had never heard from the director before. It was not anger. It was not irritation. It was fear, controlled, buried deep, and ancient, but fear all the same. Telvan left her office. He went back to his workstation. He sat down in front of the galactic map, and he stared at the dark zone, and he thought. He was not the type of person who could leave things alone. His species was not built for it. The Sirathi mind was a mapping mind. It cataloged, sorted, and organized. A blank space was not just a gap in the data to a Sirathi. It was a wound. It was an itch that could not be scratched. It was a wrongness that sat in the brain and grew louder with every passing hour. Over the next 2 days, Telvan did what any good cartographer would do when official channels failed. He started digging through unofficial ones. He accessed the Bureau's deep archives, the ones that held raw data going back over 1,000 years. Most of it was boring. Survey logs, equipment records, personnel files. But buried in the oldest layers, he found references to something he had never heard of before. Meeting minutes from a closed session of the Galactic Council dated to Galactic Standard Year 4111. 1 year before the Voss Accords were signed, the minutes were heavily redacted. Entire pages had been blacked out, leaving only fragments of sentences floating in a sea of censored text. But what remained was enough to make Telvan's blood run cold. Error. Unprecedented event in Sector 7, 741-Gamma. Total loss of the expeditionary fleet. No recoverable debris or signal data. Recommend immediate cessation of all survey and military activity within the designated zone. The Terran delegation has proposed terms. The expeditionary fleet. Telvan searched the military archives next and he found it. 301 years ago, the Council had sent a combined fleet into human space. The records called it the Valen Expedition, named after the Torvathi admiral who led it. 6,000 warships drawn from 12 species, equipped with the best technology the galaxy had to offer. Their mission was simple: survey and assess the rapidly changing human territory, which had gone quiet and strange in the preceding decades. The Valen expedition crossed the boundary of human space on day 1 of the mission. On day 2, all contact was lost, not gradually, not ship by ship, all at once. 6,000 warships, tens of thousands of crew members, gone in an instant. No distress signals, no emergency beacons, no debris fields. The Council had scrambled to respond. Long-range scanners were pointed at the region. More probes were sent. All returned the same thing: nothing. The fleet was simply gone, as if it had never existed. And then 6 months later, the humans had sent a diplomat to Valeth Prime, a woman named Elise Voss. She had walked into the council chamber, alone and unarmed, and she had spoken softly and kindly, and she had proposed the accords. Humanity would stay behind its boundary. The council would not cross it. Trade would continue at designated border stations. Diplomatic relations would be maintained. The council had agreed, not after long debate, not after careful negotiation. They had agreed almost immediately, with a speed that suggested they had been waiting for someone to tell them what to do. And then they had stopped asking questions. Telvan sat back in his chair. His four hands were shaking. The blue light of the map washed over him, and the dark zone sat in the middle of it all, like a closed eye. He understood now why Dren had looked at him with pity. He understood why Yulani had been afraid. They knew. They all knew. Every senior official, every council member, every admiral and ambassador and archivist. They all knew that there was a hole in the middle of the galaxy where 6,000 warships had vanished without a trace, and they had all decided together and in silence to never speak of it. It was not ignorance. It was not laziness. It was a choice. The entire galaxy had looked at the blank space on the map and decided that whatever was inside it was something they did not want to understand. But Telvan was a cartographer, and a blank space on the map was something he could not accept. He pulled up the growth data again. The dark zone had expanded by roughly 7,000 cubic light years in 300 years. That meant the boundary was moving outward at a slow but steady rate. Not fast enough to alarm anyone. Not fast enough to trigger territorial disputes. Just fast enough to notice if you were the kind of person who spent 42 years staring at maps. And the growth was accelerating. The rate had been almost flat for the first 2 centuries, but in the last 100 years, it had begun to curve upward. Not dramatically, not yet, but the math was clear. If the trend continued, the dark zone would double in size within the next 200 years, and then double again. And again. Whatever was happening inside human space, it was not finished. It was still growing, still changing, still becoming something that the galaxy had no name for. Telvan saved his files. He encrypted them with his personal key and stored them in 3 separate locations. Then he opened a new search query and typed in a name he had found in the old council minutes, a name that appeared in the fragments, circled in someone's handwriting in the margin of a physical document that had been scanned and buried in the deepest layer of the archive. The name was Marin Voss, the same surname as the woman who had written the accords. Telvan searched the current diplomatic registry and found her immediately. Liaison Marin Voss, human, assigned to the permanent Terran diplomatic mission on Valeth Prime. She had been in her post for 12 years. Her file was clean, professional, and completely unremarkable. Telvan looked at her photo, a human face, soft and symmetrical, with dark eyes and a small smile. She looked kind. She looked ordinary. She looked like someone you would pass in a corridor and never think about again. But she carried the name of the woman who had walked into the council chamber 300 years ago and with nothing but soft words had convinced the galaxy to look away. Telvan closed the file and stared at the dark zone on the map one more time. It stared back, vast and patient. He had spent 42 years filling in blank spaces. He was not going to stop now. Tomorrow he would find Marin Voss. Tomorrow he would ask questions, and somewhere in the dark, in the space that no map could chart and no probe could reach, something that had once been human and was now something else entirely continued its slow and silent work. Building wonders that would break the mind of any being that saw them, tending to a garden of impossible things, and watching the rest of the galaxy with the gentle, patient eyes of a parent watching children play in a yard, knowing that one day they would grow up, but not yet, not yet, not yet. The map stayed dark, the charts stayed blank, and outside the dark zone, the galaxy went about its business, trading and arguing and building and dreaming, and never looking too closely at the shadow in the middle of everything, never asking the question that everyone knew, but no one dared to speak. What had the humans become? And the silence answered, the way silence always answers, with nothing at all. Tavan found Marin Voss in the most ordinary place imaginable. She was sitting in the public cafeteria on level 12 of Valeth Prime, eating a bowl of soup and reading something on a small tablet. Around her, dozens of beings from a dozen different species moved through their morning routines, collecting food, finding seats, talking in low voices about trade reports, and scheduling conflicts and all the small, forgettable business of galactic governance. She did not look like someone who was hiding anything. She looked like someone who was having breakfast. Artelvan stood at the entrance of the cafeteria for a long moment, watching her. He had spent the entire night preparing for this conversation. He had organized his questions. He had rehearsed his approach. He had considered a dozen different strategies for getting her to reveal something, anything, about the dark zone on the map. But now, looking at her, he felt a strange hesitation. It was not fear exactly. It was something closer to the feeling he got when he stood at the edge of a deep hole and looked down into it. The feeling that once he stepped forward, there would be no stepping back. He stepped forward anyway. Liaison Voss? She looked up from her tablet. Her eyes were dark brown, warm and steady. She smiled the way humans smiled, with their lips and their eyes at the same time, which was a thing Telvan had always found slightly unnerving. Most species smiled with one or the other, not both. Cartographer Rowe, she said, as if she had been expecting him. Please, sit down. Would you like something to eat? The fact that she knew his name without introduction should have been his first warning. But Telvan was stubborn, and stubborn people often walked past warnings the way they walked past street signs, noting them, understanding them, and ignoring them completely. He sat down across from her. I will not take much of your time, he said. Take as much as you need, she replied. She set her tablet aside and folded her hands on the table. Her posture was open, relaxed, and completely unhurried. What can I do for you? Telvan had planned to start slowly, to ask general questions about human council relations, to probe for inconsistencies, to work his way gradually toward the topic of the dark zone. But sitting across from her, looking into those calm brown eyes, he found that he did not want to play games. She knew why he was here. He could feel it. I want to ask you about the blank zone on the galactic map, he said. Marin Voss did not blink. She did not tense. She did not look away. She simply nodded, as if he had asked her about the weather. All right, she said. What would you like to know? 9,000 cubic light years of space, completely uncharted and growing. No probe data, no survey records, no signal penetration. Every senior official I have spoken to either refuses to discuss it or tells me to leave it alone. The bureau director herself implied that the blank zone is intentional. How that the map is meant to look this way? He paused. Marin said nothing. She was listening with a kind of attention that made him feel like he was the only person in the room. I found records of the Valen expedition, he continued. 6,000 warships, total loss. No debris, no signals, no survivors. And within a year, the Voss Accords were signed and the entire galaxy agreed to stop looking. He leaned forward. You carry the same name as the woman who wrote those accords. I do not believe that is a coincidence. Marin smiled again. It was a gentle smile, without mockery or condescension. It is not a coincidence, she said. Elise Voss was my ancestor. The diplomatic post has been in my family for a long time. We consider it a responsibility. A responsibility to do what? To be the face of something that does not have a face anymore. To sit in cafeterias and eat soup and attend committee meetings and make sure that the galaxy knows that humans are still here, that we are still present, still part of things. Telvan's antennae twitched. Still part of things, he repeated. That is an interesting choice of words. It implies that there is a version of events in which you would not be. Marin picked up her spoon and stirred her soup slowly. You are very clever, Cartographer Rowe. The Serathi usually are. I am not looking for compliments. I am looking for answers. I know. She set the spoon down. And I will give you what I can. But you must understand that there are things I cannot say. Not because I am forbidden, but because the words do not exist in any language you or I speak. Some truths are too large for language. They can only be felt or seen or lived. Do you understand? Telvan did not understand, but he nodded anyway, because he wanted her to keep talking. The Voss Accords are exactly what they appear to be, Marin said. A mutual agreement. Humanity stays within its boundaries. The Council does not cross them. Trade continues. Diplomacy continues. Everyone is happy. Everyone is afraid, Telvan corrected. Marin tilted her head. Is there a difference? Fear and happiness are not always opposites. Sometimes fear is what keeps happiness alive. A parent fears for their child, and that fear keeps the child safe. The galaxy fears the dark zone. Yes, and that fear keeps the galaxy whole. You are avoiding my question. You have not asked a question. You have made statements and waited for me to confirm them. That is not the same thing. Telvan clicked his mandibles, which was the Cyrathi equivalent of a frustrated sigh. She was right. He had been circling the real question, the one that sat at the center of everything, the one he was almost afraid to ask. What happened to the Valen expedition? He asked. Marin was quiet for a long time. Around them, the cafeteria hummed with the soft noise of dozens of beings going about their lives. Someone laughed at a nearby table. A Dolinari diplomat argued quietly with a Pelway trade commissioner about import tariffs. The universe went on, ordinary and oblivious. They were returned, Marin said finally. Telvan stared at her. Returned? And the records say total loss. No survivors. The records say no survivors were recovered by the Council, Marin corrected gently. That is not the same as saying there were no survivors. The ships were disabled. The crews were sedated. Everyone was placed in medical stasis and delivered to the nearest Council border station in escape pods. Every single one of them, alive and unharmed. Telvan felt his world shift slightly, like a picture frame tilting on a wall. That is not in any record I have seen. No, it would not be. The Council chose not to include that detail in the official account. It was easier to say the fleet was lost than to explain what actually happened. Why? Because the crews remembered nothing. Their memories of the event were gone, completely, cleanly, as if they had never existed. They woke up in escape pods with no idea how they got there. Medical scans showed no trauma, no chemical interference, no neurological damage. Their memories were simply absent, as if someone had reached into their minds and gently removed a single chapter from a book, leaving everything else intact. She paused. The Council debriefed them for months, ran every test, tried every technique. Nothing worked. The memories were gone. And without memories, there was no evidence, no testimony, no data. Just 6,000 warships that had entered human space and 6,000 crews that had come back with a gap in their heads where the experience should have been. And the ships? Returned as well, intact, fully fueled, in some cases in better condition than when they left. Minor hull damage had been repaired. When outdated components had been replaced with newer equivalents. One ship had a coffee machine installed that had not been there before. Telvan did not know what a coffee machine was, but he understood the implication. Whoever had taken the fleet had not just returned it. They had maintained it, cared for it, like a neighbor returning a borrowed tool after cleaning and sharpening it. The Council saw all this, Telvan said slowly, and instead of being reassured, they were terrified. Yes, because a species that can disable 6,000 warships without firing a shot, erase the memories of their crews without leaving a trace, and return everything in better condition than it was found, that is not a species you can fight. That is not a species you can negotiate with in any meaningful way. Haman, that is a species that is so far beyond you that the gap cannot be measured. Yes, Marin said again, and this time her voice was very soft. Now you understand. Telvan sat back. His 4 hands rested on the table, and he noticed they were trembling slightly. He pressed them flat against the surface to make them stop. The Accords were not a negotiation, he said. They were a gift. Humanity told the Council what to do, and the Council did it, because the alternative was, what? What would have happened if the Council had said no? Marin shook her head. Nothing would have happened. That is the point. Humanity would not have done anything. There would have been no punishment, no retaliation, no threat. The Accords were offered, not imposed. If the Council had said no, the humans would have said, all right, and gone home and continued doing what they were doing behind the boundary. The galaxy would have kept sending fleets, and the fleets would have kept coming back empty-handed and empty-headed. And eventually the council would have gotten tired and stopped on its own. Then why did the council agree so quickly? Because it is easier to accept a gift than to admit you are powerless. The Accords gave the council a story it could tell itself. We agreed to this. We chose this. We are partners in this arrangement. It is much more comfortable than the truth, which is that humanity drew a line, and the galaxy discovered it could not cross it, and nothing anyone did would ever change that. Telvan was quiet for a long time. Marin waited. She was very good at waiting. He supposed that was a skill you developed when your job was to be the friendly, ordinary face of something that was neither friendly nor ordinary, but something else entirely. Something that wore friendliness and ordinariness, the way a giant might wear a mask made for a child's face. I want to go to the boundary, he said. Marin's expression did not change, but something shifted behind her eyes. A flicker of something. Concern, perhaps, or recognition. Many people have wanted that, she said. What happened to them? They went. They stood at the edge. They looked into the dark, and they came home. The boundary is not a wall, cartographer Rowe. No one will stop you from going there. But I should tell you that what you find there will not answer your questions. It will only give you more. I am a cartographer. More questions are what I live for. She studied him for a moment, and he had the strange sensation that she was not just looking at him, but through him, as if his shell were glass, and she could see every thought moving behind it. Then she nodded. Go to Harkin's Reach, she said. It is the last charted system before the boundary. There is a council border fleet stationed there. Ask for Fleet Admiral Zorath Kell. He has been patrolling that border for 30 years. If anyone can help you understand what you are looking at, it is him. Will he talk to me? He will talk to you. Whether you will like what he says is another matter. She picked up her spoon and returned to her soup, and Telvan understood that the conversation was over. He stood, thanked her, and walked away. At the door of the cafeteria, he paused and looked back. She was eating her soup and reading her tablet, small and ordinary and human, sitting in a room full of aliens who had no idea that the quiet woman in the corner was the ambassador of something that could fold their entire civilization into a paper crane and set it on a shelf. He turned away and went to book a transport to Harkin's Reach. The journey took 11 days by standard FTL. Telvan spent the time reviewing everything he knew, organizing his notes, and trying not to think about what Marin had told him. It did not work. The image of 6,000 warships being gently returned, cleaned and repaired, their crews sleeping peacefully with holes in their memories, played in his mind on a loop. It was not the power that disturbed him. He had always known that the galaxy contained beings of great power, and the Mavari had once reshaped entire star systems. The ancient Keldathi had built structures that still orbited dead worlds, vast and silent and beyond anyone's ability to replicate. Power was not new. What disturbed him was the gentleness. A species powerful enough to erase a fleet should not have been gentle about it. Every historical precedent said so. Power corrupted, power destroyed. Power made you careless with the small things, because when you were strong enough, everything was small. But humanity had taken 6,000 warships and handled them the way you might handle a bird that had flown into your window. Carefully, softly, making sure nothing was broken, and then setting it free. That was not how power worked. That was not how anything worked. Unless the humans were something that the galaxy had never seen before. Unless they had found a way to become vast without becoming cruel. Unless they had solved the oldest problem in the universe, the problem of what to do with strength. And the answer they had found was so simple and so strange that no one in the galaxy could even imagine it. Kindness. Just kindness. On a scale that made no sense, Harkin's Reach was a tired system. One yellow star, 4 rocky planets, a thin asteroid belt, and a space station that had been built for war, but had spent 300 years doing nothing but watching. The station bristled with weapons that had never been fired and sensor arrays that pointed into darkness that never changed. Fleet Admiral Zorath Kell met Telvan in his command center. The admiral was Torvathi, tall, scaled, with a jaw full of teeth and eyes like chips of volcanic glass. When his species was militaristic by nature and by culture, bred for war over thousands of generations. They were not the kind of beings who frightened easily, but Kell was frightened. Telvan could see it in the way the admiral held himself. in the careful control of his movements, in the way his eyes kept drifting toward the tactical display where the dark zone sat like a held breath. Marin Voss sent you, Kel said. It was not a question. She suggested I speak with you. She suggests many things. Sit down, cartographer. I will tell you what I can. It will not be much, but it will be honest, and that is more than most people on this station would give you. They sat across from each other in the dim red light of the command center. The tactical display hummed between them, and the dark zone filled half of it, massive and empty and close. I have commanded this fleet for 30 years, Kel said. My predecessor commanded it for 40 before me, and his predecessor before him. This post has been continuously manned since the Accords were signed, 300 years of watching a border that has never been crossed from the other side. Has anything ever come out? Telvan asked. Trade ships, on schedule, at designated points exactly as the Accords specify. They arrive, they dock at the border stations, they exchange goods, and they leave. The crews are human. They are polite. They talk about normal things. They drink with my officers and play card games and tell jokes. And then they go back into the dark, and my sensors lose them the moment they cross the line. Nothing else? Kel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, once, 12 years ago, I was on the observation deck, alone during a night cycle. I was looking at the boundary, the way I often do, and I saw something. He stopped. His jaw worked, and Telvan could see the muscles in his neck tighten. What did you see? Light. Not a ship, not a signal, just light. It came from deep inside the dark zone, far beyond anything my sensors could reach. It was there for maybe 3 seconds, and in those 3 seconds, I do not have words for what I saw. It was as if someone had opened a door in the side of the universe and shown me what was behind it. Colors that do not exist, shapes that should not be possible, structures so large that my mind could not hold them. He looked at Telvan with his volcanic eyes. I am a soldier cartographer. I have fought in wars. I have watched ships burn and friends die. Now, I do not frighten easily, but in those 3 seconds, I understood something that I have never been able to forget. What? That we are children? All of us. Every species in this galaxy. We are children playing with sticks and stones. And the humans are not. Whatever they are now, they stopped being what we are a very long time ago. And they were kind enough not to show us. The words hung in the air between them. Telvan thought about Marin Voss sitting in a cafeteria eating soup. He thought about trade ships docking at border stations, their crews telling jokes and playing cards. He thought about 6,000 warships, returned gently, with a coffee machine as a parting gift. Do you think they are dangerous? He asked. Kel laughed. It was not a happy sound. Dangerous? No. A storm is dangerous. A predator is dangerous. What the humans are, that word does not apply. You do not call the ocean dangerous when you are standing on the shore. You just know not to swim out too far. He leaned forward. You want to know what I think, cartographer? I think the humans found something, or became something, or built something. I do not know which, and it does not matter. What matters is that they are still here. They did not leave. They did not vanish the way other ascended species have throughout history. They stayed. They kept their borders. They kept their trade. They kept sending people like Marin Voss to sit in cafeterias and smile and pretend that everything is normal. He tapped the tactical display with one clawed finger. The dark zone rippled faintly. And that, cartographer, is the most terrifying thing of all, because it means they chose this. They chose to stay. They chose to be our neighbors. And the only reason you choose to stay in a neighborhood full of children is if you care about the children. He pulled his hand back. I do not know what is inside that boundary. I do not want to know. But whatever it is, it has been watching over us for 300 years. And the only thing it has ever asked of us is to leave it alone. Telvan stared at the dark zone. It filled the display like a held breath, vast and patient and still. I want to go closer, he said. Kel looked at him for a long time. Then the old soldier sighed, a sound like stone grinding against stone. You mapmaker, he said. You never know when to stop drawing lines. He stood and walked to the window. Outside, the stars burned cold and distant, and beyond them, the dark began. Be careful. A cartographer, he said. Some maps are left blank for a reason, and the reason is not that there is nothing there. The reason is that what is there is too much. Telvan did not answer. He was already planning his next move. The boundary was close. The dark zone was waiting, and somewhere inside it, something old and vast and gentle was watching, the way it always watched, with eyes that saw everything and a patience that had no end. Tomorrow he would go closer, and the dark would be ready for him. The fringe of civilized space was not a place for careful people. It was a ragged edge where law thinned out like air at high altitude, where the rules of the Council of Aligned Species became suggestions and then memories and then nothing at all. Out here, stations were held together with patch metal and stubbornness. Ships flew without registration codes. People used names that changed with the season. Telvan hated it. His Serathi mind craved order the way a drowning person craved air. Every unregistered ship, every unlabeled corridor, every uncharted asteroid made his antennae twitch with discomfort. But the fringe was where the stories lived, and the stories were what he needed. He had left Harkin's Reach 4 days ago, traveling deeper into the border regions on a small chartered transport. Admiral Kell had not tried to stop him. The old soldier had simply watched him go, with an expression that sat somewhere between respect and pity, the way one might watch a moth flying toward a flame, knowing what would happen and knowing there was nothing to be done about it. The stories had started almost immediately. Every border settlement had them. Every bar and docking bay and repair shop had someone who knew someone who had seen something near the boundary. Most of the stories were garbage. Drunken spacers telling tales about ghost ships and phantom lights. Smugglers boasting about how close they had come to the dark zone, getting braver with every drink. Telvan listened to all of them and believed none of them, until he heard about Gris. The name came up 3 times in 3 different ports, which in the fringe was the equivalent of a scientific citation. A Nolanti smuggler named Gris, who had supposedly crossed the boundary and come back alive. Not just alive, but with his ship intact and his body unharmed. The details varied with each telling, but the core of the story stayed the same. Gris had gone in, Gris had come out, and Gris had never been the same. Where Telvan found him on a station called the Fracture. The Fracture was exactly what it sounded like. A cracked and broken thing, a station that had been decommissioned twice and rebuilt 3 times, each time with less care than the last. It hung in the shadow of a dead moon at the very edge of council space, so close to the boundary that Telvan's navigation instruments had begun to behave strangely, showing readings that flickered and jumped, as if uncertain about the nature of the space around them. Gris was in a storage bay on the station's lowest level, surrounded by crates and junk, sitting in a nest he had made from old blankets and packing material. The Nolanti were small, rodent-like beings with large ears and quick, nervous movements. They were known throughout the galaxy as skilled mechanics and shameless thieves, well, usually in that order, but the creature Telvan found in that storage bay did not look skilled or shameless. Gris looked broken. He was thin, even by Nolanti standards, with patchy fur and eyes that moved too fast, darting from shadow to shadow, as if expecting something to leap out at any moment. When Telvan entered the bay, Gris flinched so hard he knocked over a stack of crates. "I am not here to hurt you," Telvan said, holding up his 4 hands in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. "My name is Telvan Rowe. I am a cartographer. I want to ask you about your experience at the boundary." Gris stared at him. His nose twitched rapidly, which was a Nolanti stress response. "Cartographer," he repeated as if testing the word. "You make maps?" "Yes." "Then you should know that there are places where maps stop working. Places where the lines on the paper do not mean anything anymore. I have been to one of those places, and it broke something inside me, and I do not want to talk about it." "I understand," Telvan said, "but I need to know what you saw." "Why? Why does it matter? It is over there, behind the line, and we are over here. That is how it works. That is how it has always worked. You go over there and you come back wrong, or you do not come back at all. So why do you want to know?" Telvan thought about this. He could have given a professional answer. Because accuracy matters. Because the map must be complete. Because knowledge is the foundation of civilization. All of these things were true, but none of them were the real reason. "Because I cannot stop thinking about it," he said. "The blank space. It sits in my mind like a splinter. And I have to know what is there, or it will drive me mad." Gris looked at him for a long time. Then something in the Nolanti's expression shifted. Not softened exactly, but changed, as if he recognized something in Telvan's words. A shared condition, a common sickness. Sit down, Grizz said. I will tell you, but you will not believe me, and when I am finished, you will wish I had not told you. Telvan sat on an overturned crate. Grizz wrapped a blanket tighter around his thin shoulders and began to talk. It was 3 years ago. Standard years, I mean. For me, it felt like minutes. That is the first thing you need to understand. Time is different in there. Not broken, not wrong, just different. Like time is a river out here, flowing in one direction, and in there it is an ocean, and you can swim in any direction you want. He paused, gathering himself. His ears were flat against his skull. I was running a cargo job. Illegal, obviously. Medical supplies stolen from a council shipment, bound for a colony that could not afford to buy them through proper channels. I was cutting through the edge of Sector 7741 Gamma to save fuel. Everyone does it. You fly along the very edge of the boundary, where the dark zone starts, and you save maybe 3% on your fuel costs. It is a common trick out here. Everyone knows you do not go in. You just fly along the edge. But you went in, Telvan said. My FTL drive misfired. I had been running it too hard, skipping maintenance. The jump calculation was off by a fraction of a percent, and instead of skipping along the boundary, I punched through it. By the time I realized what had happened, I was already inside. Grizz's hands were shaking. He pressed them against his knees to steady them. The first thing I noticed was the silence, not the absence of sound. My ship was still humming. My instruments were still beeping. I mean a deeper silence. The silence of being in a place where no one was watching. You know how in the galaxy there is always someone watching? Probes, satellites, stations, ships. There is always a signal, always a presence. In there, all of that was gone. I was completely alone for the first time in my life, and it was the most frightening thing I have ever felt. But you were not alone, Telvan said. No, I was not. But I did not know that yet. For the first few minutes, or what felt like minutes, I tried to turn my ship around. But my navigation instruments were showing me things that made no sense. Stars were not where they were supposed to be. Some of them were moving, not drifting, the way stars do over millions of years. Moving, deliberately. As if someone was rearranging them the way you might rearrange furniture in a room. He stopped. His eyes had gone distant, staring at something that was not in the storage bay. I saw structures, he said. Not ships, not stations. Structures. Things built between stars, connecting them. Made of materials I could not identify, in shapes my mind could not hold. I would look at one, and my brain would try to understand it, and it would slip away like trying to hold water in your fingers. I could see them, but I could not comprehend them. They were too big, too complex, too everything. Could you describe even one of them? Telvan asked, his cartographer's mind desperate for specifics. Grizz thought for a moment. Imagine a spider's web, he said, but the web is made of light, and each thread connects one star to another, and the web is alive. It pulses, it breathes, and the spider is not one thing. The spider is everywhere. The spider is the web. He shook his head. That is not right. That is not close to right. But it is the nearest my words can get. What happened next? I panicked. I tried to make a random jump, to get out, to go anywhere. And that is when the voice came. Telvan's antennae went rigid. A voice? From my ship's communication system. Clear as day. Speaking Nolanti. Perfect Nolanti, not the trade pigeon that most species use, but proper Nolanti with the right accent, in the right grammar, and even the right colloquial expressions. A human voice. Calm. Gentle. Oh, like a doctor talking to a patient. What did it say? Grizz closed his eyes. When he spoke, his voice changed slightly, as if he were reciting something he had memorized through sheer repetition, something he had replayed in his mind 1,000 times. It said, "You are not in danger. You have entered our space by accident. We understand this. We are going to help you leave. Please do not be afraid. We mean you no harm. You will be returned to where you came from. Please do not come back." He opened his eyes. That was it. Polite, kind, firm. like a parent telling a lost child that they would be taken home. And then my ship moved. I did not touch the controls. The ship just moved. Smoothly, gently, the way you pick up something fragile. I felt no acceleration, no force. The stars outside my window shifted. And then I was outside the boundary again, in normal space, with my instruments working properly and my navigation showing me exactly where I was. And 3 years had passed. 3 years. My cargo had expired. My contacts thought I was dead. Everything I had was gone, but my ship was in perfect condition. Better than perfect. The FTL drive that had misfired, it was fixed, not patched, not repaired. Rebuilt from the ground up with components I have never seen before. My hull plating was new. My life support was running at twice its normal efficiency. Even my food synthesizer was working better. They had not just returned me, they had taken care of my ship as if it were their own. He pulled the blanket tighter. That is the thing that keeps me awake at night, cartographer. Not the structures, not the moving stars, not the voice. The care. The absolute, deliberate, meticulous care that they took with me and my ship. I was an intruder, a nobody, a smuggler who had stumbled into a place he should never have been, and they treated me like a guest. Telvan sat in silence for a long time. The storage bay hummed with the distant sounds of the station. Pipes groaning, machinery clanking, the faint murmur of voices from decks above. Ordinary sounds, the sounds of a universe that made sense. "Thank you," he said finally. "Do not thank me," Grizz said. "I have given you the splinter you already had and made it bigger. You will go in there now, will you not?" Telvan did not answer, which was answer enough. "Then I am sorry for you," Grizz said, "because you will see things your mind was not made to see, and you will come back changed. And you will spend the rest of your life trying to explain something that has no explanation. That is what it means to go behind the line. You do not come back wrong. You come back knowing, and the knowing is worse." Telvan left the fracture the next day, but he did not go to the boundary. Not yet. There was one more person he needed to find first. Archivist Pendle lived on a small moon at the edge of Sector 5500, in a facility that was half library and half cave system. The Mavari were a crystalline species, ancient beyond measure, with bodies made of living mineral that grew and changed over thousands of years. Pendle was old even by Mavari standards. Her body was a cathedral of violet and amber crystal, catching and refracting the dim light of her underground chamber in patterns that shifted as she moved. She had been collecting information about humanity for over 600 years, not officially, not for any institution or government, simply because, as she put it, the anomaly was interesting and I am patient. Her chamber was filled with data crystals, physical documents, holographic recordings, and artifacts from dozens of species, all relating in some way to humanity and the Dark Zone. It was the largest private collection of its kind in the galaxy, and it had been assembled over centuries by a being who had nothing but time and an appetite for patterns. "The humans were unremarkable," Pendle said, her voice like wind moving through a glass chime. She moved slowly through her collection, touching crystals that lit up with data as her fingers passed over them. 400 years ago, they were a mid-tier spacefaring civilization. Clever, resourceful, adaptable, the usual descriptors. They had good engineers and average scientists and a culture that was energetic but chaotic. There was nothing in their profile that would have predicted what happened next. "What did happen?" Telvan asked. "Roughly 350 years ago, humanity underwent what I call the acceleration. Over the course of approximately 50 years, their technological capabilities advanced by what we would normally expect to take 10,000 years. Their energy production increased by a factor of several million. Their computational capacity became effectively infinite. Their biology changed. I do not know how or into what, but they stopped dying. Not through medicine or technology, they simply stopped." She paused at a particular crystal and held it up. It glowed with a soft, amber light. "This is a trade manifest from one of the last human settlements to maintain contact with the outside galaxy before the boundary was established. The goods they were trading were ordinary: metals, food, cultural products, but the manufacturing signatures were impossible. The items were made with a precision that exceeded the theoretical limits of any known technology. A simple metal cup made to atomic perfection. Every atom exactly where it should be. No defects, no variation. As if someone had decided what a cup should be at the most fundamental level and then simply made it be that way. What caused the acceleration? Telvan asked. I do not know. No one does. There are theories. Some believe the humans discovered something. An alien artifact, a new physics, a signal from outside the galaxy. Others believe they created something, an artificial intelligence, a new form of consciousness, a technology that fed on itself and grew exponentially. A few believe they simply evolved, that the human brain contains some dormant potential that was activated by the right set of circumstances. She set the crystal down. Personally, I believe it does not matter what caused it. What matters is what they did afterward. Because throughout galactic history, every species that has undergone a rapid ascension has done one of two things. They either destroyed themselves, consumed by the power they could not control, or they transcended completely, leaving the physical universe behind and vanishing into whatever lies beyond. But the humans did neither, Telvan said. No, they did not. They ascended and they stayed. They became something beyond our comprehension, and they continued to live next door. They maintained their borders. They kept their trade routes. They sent diplomats to council meetings. They behaved in every external way, exactly as they had before. Why? Pendle turned to face him. Her crystalline body caught the light and threw it across the walls of the chamber in 1,000 fractured colors. That, she said, is the question that has kept me alive for 600 years. Because the answer, whatever it is, tells us something fundamental about the nature of consciousness, of power, and of choice. Every other ascended species left. The humans stayed. And the only reason I can imagine for staying is that they had a reason to. Something that mattered to them more than the infinite freedom of transcendence. Wearing something that held them here, in this galaxy, among species that were to them what insects are to us. What could possibly matter that much? The old Mivari was silent for a long time. Then she said, I believe they care about us. Not the way a scientist cares about a specimen. Not the way a god cares about worshippers. The way a parent cares about a child. Stubbornly, irrationally, and without limit. I believe the humans looked at the galaxy and saw something worth staying for. And I believe they will stay for as long as we need them to, even though we will never know they are there. Telvan left Pendle's chamber with more questions than answers, which was exactly what Marin Voss had predicted. He sat in his small ship, orbiting the moon, staring at the star chart on his console. The dark zone was visible even from here, a vast absence in the grid of map systems, growing slowly, steadily, patiently. He thought about Grizz, trembling in a storage bay, haunted by kindness he could not explain. He thought about Kel, watching the boundary night after night, a soldier standing guard against something he could never fight. He thought about Pendle, spending 6 centuries trying to answer a question that might not have an answer. He thought about Marin Voss, eating soup in a cafeteria, carrying the weight of 300 years of silence on her ordinary human shoulders. And then he received a message. It appeared on his communication system without warning. No sender ID, no transmission signature, no indication of origin. Just text, displayed on his screen in perfect Sirathi script, as if someone had reached through the walls of his ship and placed the words there by hand. 2 words. Stop looking. Telvan stared at the message. His antennae were flat against his skull. His 4 hands gripped the arms of his chair. He ran a trace on the signal. It took his computer less than a second to produce a result, which was strange because signal traces usually took minutes. The result was also strange because it was impossible. The message had originated from inside the dark zone, not from the boundary, not from the edge. From deep inside, thousands of light years past the line, from a location that did not exist on any map. Someone was watching him. Someone who could write in perfect Sirathi, bypass every security protocol on his ship, and send a message from a place that the entire galaxy had agreed to pretend did not exist. Someone who was being very polite about telling him to go away. Telvan closed the message. He sat in silence for a long time. Outside his window, the stars burned, and beyond them, the dark waited. He thought about what Grizz had said. You will come back knowing, and the knowing is worse. He thought about what Kel had said. Some maps are left blank for a reason. He thought about what Pendle had said. They care about us. And then he set a course for the boundary. Because he was a cartographer, and the map had a blank space, and the blank space had just sent him a message. And that meant the blank space knew his name, and that meant the blank space was not empty at all. It was full. It was alive. It was waiting. And Telvan Rowe, stubborn and frightened and burning with a curiosity that was stronger than his fear, was going to find out what it was waiting for. The boundary did not look like anything. That was the worst part. Telvan had expected something visible, a wall of energy, a shimmer in space, a line of warning beacons. Something that said here is where the known world ends and the unknown begins. But there was nothing, just stars, and then fewer stars, and then a subtle wrongness in the way his instruments behaved, a slight hesitation in the numbers on his screens, as if the universe itself was unsure about what lay ahead. His ship was small, a personal survey vessel, the kind that cartographers use for fieldwork. It had good sensors, a reliable FTL drive, and no weapons. It was not built for exploration into unknown territory. It was built for mapping asteroid belts and cataloging gas giants and doing all the small, careful, boring work that made the galactic map possible. It was absurd to take the ship across the boundary. Telvan knew this. He also knew that he was going to do it anyway, because the alternative was to go home and spend the rest of his life staring at a blank spot on a map. And that was a kind of death that was worse than any danger. He had been sitting at the edge for 2 hours, running final checks and trying to convince himself that this was a reasonable thing to do. It was not a reasonable thing to do. It was, by any rational measure, the most unreasonable thing he had ever done or would ever do. 6,000 warships had crossed this line and come back empty-headed. A smuggler had crossed it and come back broken. And here was Telvan Rowe, cartographer, in a ship the size of a small house, about to cross it on purpose. His communication system chimed. A message from Valeth Prime routed through the relay network at Harkin's reach. He opened it. It was from Ambassador Keth Morvain. Telvan knew the name, but had never met the man. Morvain was Dolanari, one of the oldest species in the galaxy, tall and gray-skinned, with a face that seemed carved from stone and eyes that had seen centuries of politics and war. He was one of the most senior diplomats in Council space, a being of enormous influence in careful words. The message was brief. Cartographer Rowe. I am aware of your intentions. I urge you in the strongest possible terms to reconsider. What you are contemplating is not merely dangerous. It is unnecessary. The boundary exists for a reason, and that reason is not punishment or secrecy. It is mercy. Please turn back. The galaxy needs its mapmakers alive. K. Morvain. Telvan read the message twice, then he saved it, filed it in his personal archive, and turned his ship toward the boundary. Mercy. That was a strange word for a diplomat to use. Not security, not sovereignty, not protocol. Mercy. He pushed the thought aside and engaged his engines. The crossing was not dramatic. There was no flash of light, no alarm, no physical sensation. One moment he was in known space, and the next he was somewhere else. His instruments told him this because they went completely insane. Every sensor on his ship fired at once. His navigation computer crashed, rebooted, and crashed again. His star charts dissolved into meaningless patterns. The electromagnetic spectrum readings went off every scale his instruments had, registering energies that his equipment was not designed to measure and could only represent as solid bars of maximum value across every frequency. And then, as suddenly as the chaos had begun, everything went quiet. Not the silence of broken equipment, the silence of equipment that was working perfectly but had nothing familiar to report. His sensors were active, receiving data, processing it, and producing results that he could read but not understand. The stars outside his window were wrong, not absent, not hidden, wrong. They were in positions that did not match any known chart. Some of them were moving, just as Grizz had described. Not drifting, but moving with purpose, shifting across the sky like pieces on a game board. Others were connected by visible structures, filaments of light that stretched between them in arcs and webs and patterns that made Telvan's eyes ache when he tried to trace them. He saw a star change color, It went from yellow to blue in the span of a few seconds, which was something that should take millions of years. And as it changed, the filaments connected to it pulsed and brightened, as if the star were a heart and the filaments were veins carrying its light to the rest of the network. His hands were shaking, all four of them. He tried to take readings. His instruments captured data, but the data was useless. Numbers that exceeded the capacity of his computers, wavelengths that had no names, spatial measurements that contradicted themselves. His cartographer's mind, trained to organize and categorize and make sense of raw information, reached for the data and found nothing to hold on to. It was like trying to map the inside of a dream. He drifted. His engines were running, but he had no idea where he was going. Navigation was impossible. Every reference point he could see was moving or changing, or behaving in ways that made distance and direction meaningless. Time passed. He thought it was minutes, but he remembered what Grizz had said about time being different here, and he could not be sure. And then his ship stopped. Not gradually, not with a deceleration. It simply stopped moving, as gently as if a hand had reached out and caught it. His instruments showed zero velocity relative to something. He could not tell what. There was no fixed point of reference to measure against. A sound came from his communication system, not a voice, a tone, a single pure musical note, like a bell struck in perfect silence. It rang through his ship and faded slowly, and in its wake, the air felt different, warmer, calmer, as if the note had been a word in a language he did not speak, and the word had meant something like welcome or do not be afraid. Then she appeared, not through a door, not through a hatch, not through any mechanism that Telvan could see. One moment the cabin behind him was empty, and the next moment there was a human woman standing there, as if she had always been there, and he had simply not noticed her until now. She was of medium height, with dark skin and silver-white hair cut short. She wore clothes that looked simple, a gray jacket, dark trousers, and soft boots, but when Telvan looked at the fabric more closely, he could see that it moved. Not like cloth in a breeze. It moved on its own, shifting and adjusting in tiny, constant ways, as if it were alive, as if it were part of her. Her eyes were the most striking thing about her. They were dark brown, like Maren Voss's eyes, but behind them, there was something more. A depth, a weight, the sense of a mind that was not merely thinking, but was doing something much larger than thinking. The way an ocean is doing something much larger than rippling. She smiled at him. It was a warm smile, a real smile, the kind that reached the eyes and softened the whole face. And in that smile, Telvan saw something that surprised him more than the moving stars, more than the living filaments, more than the impossible physics of this impossible place. And he saw recognition. She knew him, not just his name, or his species, or his file. She knew him the way you know someone you have been watching for a long time, with interest and fondness and a gentle concern. "Hello, Telvan," she said. Her voice was ordinary, human, warm. It did not echo or resonate or do anything strange. It was just a voice, speaking his name in perfectly accented Sirathi, and somehow that was the most remarkable thing of all. "I am Captain Alara Miran," she said, "and I have been expecting you for quite some time." Telvan opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. He was a being who had spent 42 years organizing data and speaking precisely, and for the first time in his life, he could not find words. "How did you get on my ship?" he managed. She tilted her head slightly. "That is a complicated question. The short answer is that I walked. The long answer involves a discussion of spatial topology that would take approximately 300 years in your frame of reference, and I think we can skip that for now. You were expecting me." "Yes, we have been watching you since you first noticed the blank zone on the map. You are very persistent, Telvan. It is one of your better qualities." "The message," he said. "Stop looking. That was from you." "From us, yes. We hoped it would be enough. It usually is. Most people who get that close to the boundary, who start asking the right questions, they receive the message and they stop. They go home. They file the experience away in some quiet corner of their mind and they move on with their lives. But I did not stop." "No, you did not." "Yeah, which is why I am here." She moved to the co-pilot's seat and sat down, crossing one leg over the other, as casual and comfortable as if she were visiting a friend's home. "We have a protocol for this. It does not happen often, maybe once or twice a century. Someone gets too curious, too stubborn, too brave, and they cross the line. When that happens, we have a choice to make, and so do they. What choice? For us, the choice is simple: engage or redirect. We can wipe your memory of the crossing, as we did with the crews of the Valen expedition, and send you home with no harm done. Or we can talk to you, show you, let you see what is here. The choice depends on the individual. And for me, what is my choice? For you, the choice is also simple but much harder. You can turn back now, with your memory intact and no consequences. Or you will remember crossing the boundary. You will remember meeting me. You will remember that the dark zone is not dark at all, but you will not know what is inside it, and that not knowing will stay with you forever. She paused. Or you can come with me, and I will show you everything. The truth of what humanity has become. The full scope of what exists behind the boundary. You will see it with your own eyes and understand it with your own mind. And when you return to the galaxy, you will remember all of it. Why would you offer me that? No one has ever been given that choice before. That is not true. The choice has been offered before, but it has been a very long time since anyone accepted it. She looked at him with those deep, weighted eyes. You are a cartographer, Telvan. You have spent your entire life filling in blank spaces on maps. We think that makes you the right kind of person to see what is here, because you will not see it as a threat or a prize or a mystery to be exploited. You will see it as what it is: information, data, truth, and you will know what to do with it. You think very highly of cartographers. We think very highly of people who care about accuracy more than comfort. The galaxy is full of beings who would rather have a comfortable lie than an uncomfortable truth. You are not one of them. That is rare, and we respect it. Tavan looked out the window. The moving stars traced slow paths across the sky. The filaments of light pulsed between them, carrying energy and information and purpose in quantities he could not begin to calculate. And what happened to the people who accepted the choice before, he asked. They saw. They returned. They lived their lives. Some of them told others what they had seen, and they were not believed. Some of them kept it to themselves and carried the knowledge in silence. All of them were changed. You cannot see what we have built and remain unchanged. But the change is not damage. It is growth. It is what happens when a mind encounters something larger than itself and makes room for it. And if I cannot make room for it, if it breaks me the way it broke Grizz? Elara's expression softened. Grizz was not broken by what he saw. He was broken by not understanding it. He caught a glimpse through a window and spent 3 years trying to reconstruct the entire house from that glimpse. If he had seen the whole thing, he would have understood it. And understanding is not breaking. Understanding is the opposite of breaking. You could have shown him. You could have helped him. We could have. But he did not ask. He stumbled in by accident and was returned by protocol. The protocol is gentle, but it is not generous. It protects. It does not teach. Teaching requires consent, and consent requires a choice, and a choice requires someone who stands at the boundary and says, I want to know. She stood. So, do you want to know? Telvan thought about Dren, his supervisor, who had told him to move on. He thought about Director Ulani, whose fear was so old it had become part of her. He thought about Admiral Kell, who had seen 3 seconds of light and spent 30 years haunted by it. He thought about Pendle, who had spent 6 centuries collecting pieces of a puzzle she could never complete. He thought about Grizz, shaking in a storage bay, wounded by a kindness he could not name. He thought about the blank space on the map. 9,000 cubic light years of nothing, growing slowly, patiently, year by year. A hole in the galaxy's knowledge of itself. A silence that the entire civilized universe had agreed to maintain without ever discussing it. He thought about what it meant to be a cartographer. Not just the job, the calling, the deep species-level need to know where things were and what they looked like and how they connected to each other. The belief, more fundamental than any religion, that the world was better when it was mapped. That understanding was always better than ignorance. And he thought about Maren Voss, is sitting in a cafeteria, eating soup, smiling her ordinary smile, carrying the weight of a secret so large that it had reshaped the political structure of the entire galaxy. She had told him that some truths were too large for language. She had told him that they could only be seen or felt or lived. He wanted to see. He wanted to feel. He wanted to live. I am a cartographer, he said. Show me. Ilara Miran smiled, and her smile was like the boundary itself, ordinary on the surface, but behind it, something vast and luminous and endlessly deep. Then hold on to who you are, she said, because the map is bigger than you think. She raised one hand, and the walls of his ship became transparent. Not glass, not holographic. The metal and composite and insulation simply became clear, serene as if the ship had decided to stop being solid and start being a window. And through that window, Telvan saw the first edge of what humanity had built. It was a structure, or it was a million structures, or it was one structure so large that his mind kept trying to break it into pieces because it could not hold the whole thing at once. It filled his entire field of vision, stretching from horizon to horizon, if such a word had meaning here, which it did not. It was made of light, not reflected light, not emitted light. Light that existed as a substance, as solid and real as the metal of his ship had been a moment ago. Light that was structured, patterned, and organized into layers and threads and nodes of such complexity that looking at it was like reading a book in a language he did not know. He could see the symbols but could not grasp their meaning. And it was alive. He could feel it. Not through his instruments, which had given up entirely, their screens showing nothing but a soft amber glow. He could feel it through something deeper, something that was not a Serathi sense or a cartographer's instinct, but something more basic, more primal. The way you feel the sun on your face or the ground beneath your feet. The structure was alive, and it was aware of him, and it was not hostile, and it was not indifferent. It was interested, gently, patiently, kindly interested. This is the beginning, Ilara said. Her voice was soft, almost reverent, which told Tilvan that even for her, even for someone who lived here, the sight was still worth marveling at. This is where we start. Are you ready? Telvan realized he was crying. The Serathi did not produce tears the way humans did, but there was a fluid that seeped from the edges of their compound eyes when emotional stress exceeded certain thresholds. It was a response that most Serathi considered deeply embarrassing. Telvan did not care. Yes, he said, I am ready. The ship began to move, not through its own engines, through something else, something that felt like being carried, and the light surrounded them, and the structures opened before them like flowers opening to a sun, and Telvan Rowe, cartographer, 42 years of blank spaces and careful lines and precise measurements, when entered the heart of human space and began to understand why the map had always been too small. Somewhere behind them, the boundary held. The dark zone sat on the galactic map like a closed eye, vast and patient and still. And the galaxy went on, trading and building and dreaming, and did not look too closely at the silence in its center. But inside the silence, a door had opened, and a map maker had walked through it, and nothing would ever be the same. Telvan had mapped asteroid fields. He had charted the magnetic currents of gas giants. He had traced the gravitational patterns of binary star systems and plotted trade routes through nebulae so dense that light itself had to fight to get through. He had spent 42 years putting the universe on paper, reducing the infinite chaos of reality into clean lines and clear labels. None of it had prepared him for this. Ilara guided him through human space the way a patient teacher guides a student through a museum, slowly, carefully, allowing time for each wonder to settle before introducing the next. She seemed to understand that his mind needed time to adjust, that each new thing he saw required him to rebuild his understanding of what was possible before he could take in more. The first thing she showed him was the stars. We do not orbit them anymore, she said as they moved through a region of space where 7 stars burned in a perfect ring, connected by arcs of structured energy that pulsed in slow rhythmic waves. We tend them. Each star is a living system now, managed and maintained the way your people might maintain a garden. We adjust their output, extend their lifespans. We tune their radiation to support the ecosystems around them. A star that would naturally burn out in 5 billion years can be sustained indefinitely. We have stars here that should have died 100 million years ago, still burning because we choose to keep them alive. Telvan stared at the ring of stars. Each one was wrapped in a lattice of technology so vast that the star itself was just a bright point at the center, like a seed inside a fruit. The lattice caught the star's energy, redirected it, channeled it through the connecting arcs to the other stars in the ring. It was a system, a circuit, 7 stars working together as a single engine, producing energy on a scale that made his instruments meaningless. Dyson spheres, he said, reaching for a concept he knew. Beyond Dyson spheres, Elara corrected gently. Her Dyson imagined a shell around a single star. We build networks across thousands of stars. Each network is a node in a larger system. Each system is part of a still larger structure. It goes up and up, layer upon layer, until the entire territory operates as a single entity, one mind made of stars. One mind? Not in the way you are thinking, not a hive mind, not a collective consciousness that erases the individual. Every human is still a person. Every human still has their own thoughts, their own feelings, their own identity. But we are also connected. We can share experiences, knowledge, memories. When I look at you, I see you through my own eyes. But if I choose, I can also see you through the eyes of every human in this network. Billions of perspectives all at once. And every one of them is seeing you with curiosity and warmth. Tevan's antennae flattened against his skull. Billions of beings are watching me right now? Watching is not the right word. They are aware of you. The way you might be aware of a butterfly that lands on your hand. You notice it, you appreciate it. You do not study it or hunt it or cage it. You simply enjoy the fact that it is there. She guided the ship deeper. The structures grew larger, not gradually, but in sudden leaps of scale that left Telvan gripping the arms of his chair. They passed through a region where space itself was folded into shapes that his geometry could not describe, curves and angles and dimensions that existed outside the 3 he was built to perceive. His eyes kept trying to make sense of what they were seeing, and his brain kept failing. Or when the failure did not feel like confusion or pain. It felt like growth, like a muscle stretching into a new position, uncomfortable but not harmful. This is what we call the fold, Elara said. Our replacement for faster-than-light travel. Your FTL drives push a ship through space at speeds that exceed light. That works, but it is crude. It tears the fabric of space-time and leaves scars that take decades to heal. The fold does not move the ship. It moves space itself. We take the distance between 2 points and reduce it, compress it, fold it the way you might fold a piece of cloth to bring 2 distant corners together. The ship does not travel. It stays still. The universe moves around it. That is impossible, Telvan said, because that was what his training told him to say, even though he was watching it happen in front of his eyes. Elara laughed. It was a gentle, genuine laugh, full of affection. Everything here is impossible by the standards you were taught, and yet here it is. The difference between impossible and real is just understanding. When you understand how something works, it stops being impossible and starts being obvious. They moved on. Elara showed him the living worlds. These were planets that had been transformed so completely that the word planet barely applied anymore. They were not spheres of rock and water and air. They were organisms, conscious, thinking, feeling organisms the size of worlds, with ecosystems that functioned as nervous systems and atmospheres that served as sensory organs. The beings who lived on these worlds did not live on them the way one might live in a house. They lived with them, in partnership, in conversation. The planet knew the name of every creature that walked its surface, and every creature knew the planet's thoughts, felt its moods, shared in its slow and massive dreams. Telvan watched a world breathe, not metaphorically. Its surface rose and fell in a rhythm that matched the orbital period of its nearest moon, and with each breath, the atmosphere shimmered with colors that he had no names for, colors that existed outside the visible spectrum of every species he knew, and yet somehow he could see them, as if being inside human space had expanded his perception, stretched his senses to accommodate things they were never designed to detect. "Are you doing this to me?" he asked. "Changing me so I can see?" "Not changing," Elara said. "Your biology is exactly the same as when you cross the boundary. We are simply providing a translation layer. Your eyes are receiving the same light they always would. We are helping your brain process it in new ways. It is temporary. When you leave, you will remember what you saw, but you will not be able to see it again. Not until you come back." "If I come back," she smiled. "If you come back." They traveled for what felt like days. It might have been hours. It might have been weeks. Time in human space did not move the way it moved outside. It was not linear. It did not flow in one direction. It pooled and eddied and sometimes ran backward. And Ilara navigated it the way a river pilot navigates currents, with confidence and skill and an intimate knowledge of every twist and turn. She showed him the archive. It was the largest thing Telvan had ever seen, larger than a star system, larger than some nebulae. It was a structure built in the spaces between stars, a lattice of crystallized information that stretched across light years of space, glowing with a soft, amber light that reminded him of archivist Pendle's data crystals, if Pendle's crystals had been the size of planets. "This is our memory," Alara said. "Every human who has ever lived is recorded here. Not just their DNA or their vital statistics, their entire being. Every thought they ever had, every feeling they ever felt, every experience they ever lived through. All of it preserved in perfect detail, accessible to anyone who wants to revisit it." "You have conquered death," Telvan said. "No, death still exists. Humans still die when they choose to. What we have conquered is forgetting. No experience is ever lost. No person is ever truly gone. When a human dies, their body may cease, but their story continues. It becomes part of the archive, part of the shared memory of our species. And anyone who wants to can step into that memory and live it as if it were their own. That is why you stop dying. Not because you cannot, but because you choose when. Yes, death is a door, not a wall. Some people walk through it when they are ready. Some people never walk through it at all. The choice is theirs." Telvan looked at the archive and tried to calculate how much data it contained. He could not. The number exceeded the mathematical notation he knew. It exceeded the mathematical notation that any species in the galaxy knew. And it was information on a scale that made the galactic map, his life's work, the most comprehensive data set in civilized space, look like a child's drawing on the back of a napkin. And then Alara took him to the boundary itself. They approached it from the inside, and Telvan saw it for what it truly was. Not a wall, not a barrier, not a defense system. It was a filter, a translator, a membrane that sat between human space and the rest of the galaxy. And it did something extraordinarily delicate. It simplified. Everything that passed through the boundary was reduced, compressed, translated downward into forms that the outside galaxy could understand. The human trade ships that docked at border stations were not really ships. They were projections, simplified versions of something much more complex, one dressed up in hulls and engines and navigation systems so that they would look normal, so that the beings who interacted with them would not be overwhelmed by what they actually were. The diplomats were real humans. Marin Voss was a real person with a real body and a real mind. But when she crossed the boundary, she left behind the parts of herself that the galaxy could not handle. The expanded perception, the connection to the network, the ability to fold space and speak to stars and remember the lives of ancestors dead for 1,000 years. She packed all of that away, the way one might remove a suit of armor before entering a house, and she walked into the cafeteria as an ordinary woman eating soup. "Why?" Telvan asked. He had been asking this question since the beginning, and each time the answer had grown larger. Now, finally, he felt ready for the whole of it. Alara did not answer immediately. Instead, she took him to one more place. It was called the Remembering. It was not a structure. It was a space, a region of human territory that had been set aside, kept empty and dark, like a moment of silence in the middle of a symphony. And in that silence, floating in the void, were records, not of humans, of others. Telvan saw the history of species he had never heard of. Civilizations that had risen and fallen long before the current galactic order existed. Cultures that had built wonders and dreamed great dreams and reached for the stars with hands and tentacles and appendages that had no name. And he saw what had happened to them when they met something greater than themselves. He saw a species called the Valanthi, one who had encountered a transcendent civilization 10 million years ago. The Valanthi had been brilliant, creative, and ambitious. They had seen what the transcendent beings could do, and they had tried to replicate it. They had torn themselves apart in the attempt. Civil wars fought over scraps of technology they did not understand. Societies collapsing under the weight of knowledge they were not ready for. A species that had been thriving, reduced to ruins in 3 generations. He saw a species called the Orm, who had been uplifted by a well-meaning elder civilization. Given technology and knowledge far beyond their natural development, the Orm had not gone to war. They had simply stopped. Stopped innovating. Stopped dreaming. Stopped trying. Why build when someone else had already built everything? Why discover when every discovery had already been made? The Orm had withered, not from violence, but from despair. The knowledge that they could never catch up, never match what the elders had achieved, had drained them of the will to try. He saw a dozen more examples, 100, each one different in the details, each one the same in the essence. A younger species encounters an elder one. The younger species is shattered, not by malice, not by conquest, by the simple, devastating act of seeing something so far beyond them that their own achievements became meaningless in their own eyes. Every time, Ilara said softly. She was standing beside him in the dark, and her voice was heavy with something that Telvan recognized as grief. Old grief. The kind that had been carried for so long it had become part of the carrier's bones. Every time an elder meets a younger, every time the curtain is pulled back and the small ones see the big ones, it ends the same way. The small ones break. She turned to him. We know this because we studied it. We read the records. We watched the patterns play out across millions of years of galactic history. And we decided, all of us, together, that we would not do this. We would not be the sky that makes someone stop climbing. The words landed in Telvan's mind like stones dropped into deep water. He felt them sink through layers of understanding, settling into a place that felt permanent, that felt like bedrock. You hid, he said, not because you are afraid of us, but because you are afraid for us. Yes, you built all of this. The stars, the worlds, the archive, the fold, our everything. And you hid it behind a filter that makes you look ordinary, because if the galaxy saw what you really are, it would stop trying to become what it could be. Yes, you sit in cafeterias and eat soup and play card games with border guards and pretend that you are just another species, one neighbor among many, because the truth would destroy us. Not physically, spiritually. We would see your achievements and we would see our own, and the comparison would break our hearts. Yes, Ilara's voice was barely a whisper now. That is why. That is the whole of it. We are not hiding because we are dangerous. We are hiding because we remember what it is like to be small. We remember what it is like to look up at the stars and wonder what is out there, and dream about the day you will find out. That wonder, that dreaming, when that is the most precious thing in the universe. It is the engine that drives every species forward, that makes them build and discover and grow. And if we took that away, if we showed the galaxy everything and said, look, here is what is possible, here is what we have done, the wondering would stop. And when the wondering stops, everything stops. Telvan stood in the dark of the remembering, surrounded by the ghosts of broken civilizations, and he wept. Not from sadness, not from awe, from understanding, deep, bone-level, unshakable understanding of why the map was blank and why it needed to stay that way. They returned to his ship in silence. The journey back was faster, or seemed faster. The wonders of human space passed by his windows like scenes from a dream, beautiful and terrible and fading, even as he looked at them. At the boundary, Ilara stopped the ship. She stood beside his chair and looked down at him with those deep, ancient, human eyes. You will remember everything, she said. As I promised, you will carry this knowledge for the rest of your life. It is a heavy thing. I will not pretend otherwise. I know. What will you do with it? Telvan thought about this. He thought for a long time. Ilara waited. She was good at waiting. All of them were, it seemed. Patience was easy when you had eternity. I will go home, he said. I will sit at my desk. I will look at the blank space on the map, and I will leave it blank. Ilara smiled, and in her smile he saw everything she was. The woman, the captain, the ambassador of something that had no name in any language the galaxy spoke. He saw the kindness and the grief and the patience and the love. The vast, impossible, universe-spanning love that had driven an entire species to hide its greatest achievements so that others could have the joy of achieving their own. You are a good mapmaker, Telvan Ro, she said. And you are good neighbors, he replied. She laughed at that, a real laugh, full and warm and human. And then she raised her hand, and the ship slipped through the boundary like a leaf passing through a waterfall, and Telvan was back in known space, under familiar stars, with his instruments behaving normally and his navigation computer showing him exactly where he was. He was 3 hours older than when he had crossed. Outside, the galaxy went on, unchanged and unknowing. The journey back to Valith Prime took 11 days. Telvan spent them in silence, letting the knowledge settle, letting his mind make room for it the way Alara had said it would. It hurt, not physically. It was a deep, structural ache, the pain of a mind reshaping itself around a truth too large for its original design. But the pain was not damage, it was growth. He arrived at the station. He went to the cartography bureau. He sat down at his console. The galactic map stretched out before him, beautiful and incomplete, 200,000 star systems glowing in the dark. And in the middle of it all, the blank zone, 9,000 cubic light years of silence. Director Ulani appeared at his side. She looked at him with her wide, unblinking eyes, and he could see that she knew. She could see it in him, the change, the weight, the quiet certainty of someone who had been to the edge and come back with an answer. "Well," she said, "will you file a report?" Telvan looked at the blank zone. He thought about everything he had seen, the star networks, the living worlds, the fold, the archive, the remembering, Ilara's smile, Marin's soup, Kel's fear, Grizz's trembling hands, Pendle's 6 centuries of patience. He reached forward and touched the display. His cartographer's tools appeared, hovering at his fingertips, ready to fill in the blank, to chart the uncharted, to complete the map at last. Instead, he selected the label tool, and with steady hands, he typed 2 words into the dark zone in the simple, clean font that the Bureau used for all its official designations. "Here be kindness." He saved the label. He closed his tools. He turned off his console. Director Olani stared at the screen. She read the words. She read them again. And then she did something Telvan had never seen her do in all his years at the Bureau. She reached out and placed one webbed hand on his shoulder, and she said nothing, because nothing needed to be said. Telvan stood. He walked out of the Bureau, down the long corridors of Valith Prime, past diplomats and traders and soldiers, and scientists from 100 different species, all of them living their ordinary lives in their ordinary ways, building and dreaming and wondering, reaching for stars they had not yet touched, imagining futures they had not yet built. He passed the cafeteria on level 12. Through the glass, he could see Marin Voss sitting at her usual table, eating her usual soup, reading her usual tablet. She looked up as he passed. Their eyes met through the glass. She smiled, he smiled back, and he walked on, carrying the weight of the largest secret in the galaxy, and knowing that it was not a burden. It was a gift from a species that had become something beyond imagining and had chosen, out of nothing but love, to keep it to themselves, not forever, just for now, just until the galaxy was ready, just until the children had grown tall enough to see over the fence on their own. The map stayed dark, the charts stayed blank, and no one asked questions, because the silence was not empty. It was full. It was full of patience and tenderness and a faith in the future that spanned light years and centuries, and the entire breadth of what it meant to be alive in a universe that was bigger than anyone knew. And somewhere behind the boundary, in the space that no map could chart, humanity tended its garden of impossible things and watched the galaxy grow, one small, brave, beautiful step at a time, waiting, loving, and never ever looking away.